will move on to the more serious subjects. So the scientists who are going to speak to us this afternoon are going to tell us about our gut, how fragile it is, how complex it is, and the need to protect and respect it. Now, we're going to see how algal extracts can have an impact on the functioning of the gut all the way to the brain. This morning, we're going to show you that by replacing throughout the agri-food chain, we can replace a number of treatments by the natural elements which are provided by algae. And you will see there are considerable possibilities and potential for that. Now, let's look more closely at what this ecosystem within us, our second brain, i.e. the gut, is like. We have a biologist, a cellular biologist with a PhD in immunology, which he received from Nantes in 1989. And after receiving his PhD, he moved on to the INRA, the French Institute for Agronomic Research. And then he moved on to research on the human intestine or human enteric tract. And he works on the upper microbiota. And he's worked on the scientific platform Metafin. This is financed by the French program for investments for the future, working to determine the impact of the human gut and the microbiota on human health. So he has published papers, he has spoken abroad, and I'd like you to give a warm round of applause to Mr. Hervé Blotière, professor.
Monsieur Blotière, c'est à vous, on vous écoute.
Okay. So if I can have the first slide, please. Okay. Up. Okay. So first, is it possible to have the light down? Because it's really difficult. Okay. So first, I would like to thank Olmix and the people that invited me to give this lecture today. It's a great pleasure for me because Nantes is very important in my heart because I was born here. And although now I'm working near Paris, it's always a great pleasure to be in Nantes. Okay, so today I will talk about the human intestinal microbiota in health and diseases. And I would like to show you what we have done in Europe to discover and to really have large knowledge on our microbiota and how it contributes to our health. So I have to say that it's over these 5 or 6 years have been a kind of revolution for scientists, but not only for scientists. And as you can see here, with the cover of The Economist in August 2012, it's not only concerns the scientists, but also all of us. And so the question they were asking was, we are microbes makes man, which what the idea is that we are not only individuals, but we are our body is full of microbes, and so the question in the paper was what is a man, or indeed what is a woman? And for us, at the beginning, biologically, we see that the answer is easy. The human is a result of a fertilized egg containing genes coming from the mother and from the father. But the definition is now completely wrong or incomplete. We just think now that we are just ecosystems. And so the descendant of the fertilized egg is only one component of this ecosystem. And we have trillions of bacteria, and not only bacteria actually, within our body, which are really important for us, and which will really stay with us and are important for our health. So today I will just talk about the gut microbiota, but you have to know that we have bacteria all over our body, and each community, its community structure is really specific to the ecological niche or the habitat. So you can see here is the oral microbiota, very different from the gastrointestinal microbiota, the urogenital microbiota, skin, and the nasal one. So you can see every community is structure specific. Then if we look at the human intestinal microbiota, so we harbor about 100 trillion microorganisms, which is 10 times the number of cells that we have in the human body. We have hundreds of species, and what you have to understand is most of these species, 70 to 80%, have never been cultured before. I mean, still now, never been cultured. Between us in the room, we have a few dozens of species that are common between us, we call it a core, and we also consider it a stable community. Now we think that it's a true organ, and which is important in our health, and as an organ, you can transplant it. And the last, let's say, 5 years, there have been a tremendous effort to perform fecal microbiota transplantation, and it's a very powerful tool to fight, for instance, against Clostridium difficile infection, with a success 10 times better than any antibody, because they have about 95% cure after fecal microbiota transplantation. And so it's a key organ, and it's interacting, of course, with our food. If we eat algae, then the microbiota is key to degrade it, to ferment it. It's in interaction with our cells, and not only the immune cells, but also the nervous system, but also our adipocytes, from the liver cells, all the cells from the body. And it's also protecting against pathogen, which what we call the barrier function. So we work, you realize that in 2000, we sequenced, the scientific community sequenced the human genome, and we were very proud in 2010 to report in Nature. To report in Nature the sequence of our second genome, and we make the cover of Nature. And so it's a result of a European project whose name was MetaHit. And so we sequenced about 3.3 million bacterial genes, which is about 150-fold the human genome. And what was interesting is that it was coming from 124 European individuals, but as you can see here, the catalog of genes present is very good also for Japanese or US citizen. But, and it's something that it's really important, I think, it's not good for mice. So, we all know that we are quite different from mice, and our microbiota is also quite different from the microbiota from mice. So all of us harbor about 540,000 genes, and which are 40% of the genes are shared between us. So we can say that we are rather similar, but we are not identical, because we have a lot of rare genes, which means genes that are present in less than 20% of the individuals. So we went further in sequencing, actually, and this year, in 2014, we published in Nature Biotech a new catalog of the gene present in the human metagenome. And this catalog is, we believe now, almost complete. It's 10 million bacterial genes, which now is 400-fold the human genome. And it's also, it's coming from 1,200 individuals, so we really increased the number of people that were sequenced. And what was interesting from this work is that we were able to really see differences now between countries, between dietary habits actually. And here you can see the difference between Danish on that side and Chinese on the other side. Whether they are lean or obese is not important. Definitively, they have genes that are specific for Chinese, genes that are specific for European, let's say. And it's really linked to their food habits. When we look at this intestinal microbiota, and if here you have all the microbiota that are on Earth. In the gut, it's limited number, fraction of the known phyla that are present. And mainly we say there are three major phyla. One is Bacteroidetes, which are gram-negative bacteria. The other one being Firmicutes and Actinobacteria. Actinobacteria, you may know that because Bifidobacteria, for instance, that are used in milk product are coming from this phyla. So to follow my talk, I would like to insist on three gender, Bacteroides and Prevotella, which are gram-negative bacteria among the Bacteroidetes, and Ruminococcus, which is among the gram-positive Firmicutes. So we set up at INRA in Julian-Josas a quantitative metagenomic pipeline, which is simply explained on that slide. So the first thing that we have to do is to collect samples, and usually we start with stool samples because it's the easiest way to have access to our microbiota. Then from this stool sample we will extract the DNA, and then we have this sequencing machine that is making huge amount, 60 million short sequence that we are going to match on the reference catalog. And so we have one reference catalog for the world, for all the humanity, but then the abundance of these genes will vary from individuals to individuals. So what we get is gene abundance profile for every individual. So it's, of course, different. And then using bioinformatics and biostatistical tools, we can play with this data and use it for statistical analysis to make diagnosis, and I will try to explain you more on that. So we are used to say that we have developed a kind of powerful microscope that is allowing us to know what we have within the gut. So the second important finding that we made 1 year later, that was also published in Nature, was that we were able to separate individuals in what we call, in three clusters of individuals, what we name enterotypes. And you have to understand that although we named it with one bacterial gender, Bacteroides, Prevotella, or Ruminococcus, it just corresponds to ecosystems with some bacteria which like to be with the others, and some that are not together because they exclude each other. And one key thing that has to be added is that we have a very strange, it's not bacteria, but it's archaea, which especially we name Methanobrevibacter, which are bacteria, which are archaea that are producing methane. And in that room, about 50% of us are methanoproducers, which means we are producing methane. And these archaea are responsible of that. So we were asking the question, why do we have these enterotypes? Why? And so we believe that it's really linked to the dietary habits, but not the everyday dietary habits. So, and we, a few months after we published this paper, there was a paper from an American team published in Science, showing that we can link the Bacteroides enterotype to protein and animal fat consumption, and the Prevotella enterotype to carbohydrate consumption. And what was interesting in their paper actually was that it's really relatively stable, which means that if you really want to change it, you need more than 10 days of change in your food habits to really move from one enterotype to another. So we think that this is important because it should allow patient stratification and maybe develop a personal medicine and nutrition. So that's microbiota from healthy people. So we know, and there are a lot of papers in the literature showing that there are perturbations in the intestinal microbiota that are associated with chronic disease. And I mean, a lot of people will say, okay, with disease coming in the gut, yeah, it's obvious. But it's not only so for Crohn or ulcerative colitis, but you can see we have worked also on obesity and type 2 diabetes, showing very strong perturbation. And it's also true in disease from the brain, like depression, autism, and also for cardiovascular and liver disease, for instance. So today I will just talk about obesity and Crohn's disease, inflammatory bowel disease. So within the MetaID project, we sequenced the metagenome of a Danish cohort, which is composed of lean and obese individuals, but also overweight people. And what we observed actually is that we were able to strongly separate the obese one from the lean one. And we have identified bacterial genes and genomes that are associated with the fact being obese or lean. So you will tell me, oh, okay, you use very expensive tools. We don't only need a balance to know if one is obese or lean. But that's true. But if you remember, I told you about the sequence of the human genome, and we thought at that time that we will explain all the disease by the human genome. And here for obesity, if you take 18 obesity risk loci and try to see if we can discriminate obese from non-obese people, from lean, if you are random, it's the value of the ROC analysis will be 0.5. So you can see 0.58 is very bad. We definitively, with our genome, we cannot discriminate. But if we use the human microbiota, then we can really discriminate and know whether we have one person that is obese or one person who is lean. And so we went deeper in the understanding of what's happened in these obese people. And I should mention that it's 2 papers that we published in Nature last year. And we were able to show that people having good microbiota are healthier. Obese people with what we'll say rich microbiota are in better health than obese people with a poor, less rich microbiota. And so it's a result of the European MetaID project, but also from the French ANR-funded project whose name is MicroHubs. And when we looked at the number of genes, of bacterial genes present in obese individuals, we see that we have 2 groups. One group with what we name low gene count, and one group with high gene count. And that's true in the Danish cohort, but also in the French cohort, with a difference of about 240,000 genes. And by looking at the phenotype of the patient, we were able to correlate the fact of being low gene count with increased adiposity, insulin resistance, dyslipidemia, and inflammations. So, and we were again able to identify species that were markers of being low gene count or high gene count. And we are working now with startup companies that make diagnostic kit to say identifying one person is low gene count or high gene count. And we have done intervention study at the Pitié-Salpêtrière Hospital in Paris, where we had obese people that were put in a hyper-low-caloric diet for 6 weeks. So within these people, before the diet, we had this group of low gene count, this group of high gene count, rich or not rich, and we saw that the dietary intervention changed the number of bacterial genes present in the people with low gene count. Although we were not able to take them to the same level as the others. And interestingly, the people being here are the ones that lose the less weight after this diet intervention. Okay, there have been work also in type 2 diabetes patients, and here is a work from a Swedish group we are working with, and so we can again see species associated with type 2 diabetes, and we saw that we were not able to link the fact of having type 2 diabetes with the enterotypes, and again, that was published in Nature in 2012. And what we found in this type 2 diabetes patient is that you have pathways that are completely changed in the human microbiota from these obese people with, for instance, increase in oxidative stress genes or hydrogen sulfate producing genes, and a decrease in short-chain fatty acid or methane production in these obese with low gene count. Within this type 2 diabetes patients, sorry. And it's interesting because in the last century, we have worked a lot on this short-chain fatty acid, especially this one, and it's key for the health of the human gut, but not only for the human gut, and it displays immunomodulatory effect and so on, and I think the other speakers will talk about that. Then I mentioned that we can do fecal microbiota transplantation, and it has been performed here by some colleagues in the Netherlands. And here you have the insulin sensitivity. So here is lean people and this type 2 diabetes patient. And you can see by doing allogenic gut microbiota transplantation, so coming from healthy people, you can really ameliorate this insulin sensitivity, which is not true if you do autologous fecal microbiota transplantations, which means that with the microbiota from the healthy people, you can ameliorate the insulin resistance. Okay. And if we do bariatric surgery, you know that it's something that is now done for people with very morbid obesity or strong type 2 diabetes. You can see that it strongly impacts on the microbiota. That is before the intervention and 3 and 6 months after the intervention. And what was striking from that work is that after bariatric surgery, you increase the diversity of the microbiota from these patients. We did similar work in inflammatory bowel diseases patients. So you can see that we separate ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease, and healthy controls. And I would not like to go deeper on this work on IBD, but it was really, you have similar work that what we have done on obesity. But what I would like to say is that in IBD and obese patients, people with a low diversity microbiome appears to be less healthy. That's true in Danes, in lean and obese Danes. That's true in ulcerative colitis patients. And that we have a loss of diversity, especially in the Firmicutes phyla, lower gene count, and we have species that are considered as good for the health, and especially one strain, which name is Faecalibacterium prausnitzii, which display anti-inflammatory properties that are interesting in inflammatory bowel disease patients. So we think that the intestinal microbiota can use as a diagnosis tool, and as I mentioned, we have this company, Enterome, which is now exploiting the patents that we have done on this to go and use it and develop a diagnosis kit. But the major question that we would like to address now is, okay, is the microbiota the causal agent? Is it a contributor to the disease? Is it a consequence of the disease? does it play a role in the chronicity of the disease? And of course, the major one is, what are the mechanisms? Which are the genes associated with the good health or bad health? But we have to face one major problem, as I mentioned at the beginning, that how to study interaction between bugs and our cells if we are not able to cultivate these bacteria. So in Jouy and Josas, we developed a new approach whose name is functional metagenomics that I will mention in the next 2 or 3 slides. That is my particular work here. So what we want to do is trying to identify genes that are able to activate or do something to human cells. So what we generate actually, so we are starting from an ecosystem. Usually it's feces, but it can be surgical pieces. We will extract the DNA, the bacterial fraction, and then extract the DNA and cut it in large fragments of about 40 genes, 40 kb, so 40 bacterial genes, that we will clone in a particular vector, a phosmid vector, which is able to carry these 40 genes, put it in a easy used bacteria, E. coli, and generate what we name metagenomic library. What you have to understand that we have library of 20 to 60,000 clones, each clone having 40 genes coming from the original sample. So we developed high throughput screening tools. On one side, to look for the activity, the way they are able to modulate signaling pathway in human cells, but also we are looking for enzyme activity and the way to degrade carbohydrate, for instance. I will not mention further that. So we do high throughput screening and identify pieces of DNA that are able to activate signaling pathway in human cells, and then the idea is to go from the clone to the gene of interest and to the molecule involved. So we decided to study several pathways in the human body. So not only the immune part of the immune body, but also the metabolism, cell proliferation in correlation with colorectal cancer, for instance, but also the capacity to secrete hormones, gut peptides that are signaling to the brain. So we developed in the frame of the Investissement d'Avenir, demonstrator whose name is Metagenopolis, so which is a tool that is here to help people during this kind of study. So usually this Metagenopolis, we have access to patients with the ICANN, which is another result from the Investissement d'Avenir, which is the IHU for clinical studies, and it's usually the Pitié-Salpêtrière Hospital that is here. So they can give us clinical trials. And then we have one platform that is dedicated to sample biobanking, one platform for all the quantitative metagenomics that I presented to you, and also the functional metagenomics platform that I presented to you the last 2 slides. And also, together with the Université Catholique of Lyon, we have, we think that playing with gut microbiota may have ethical and society results. So we want to think to what can be the impact of studying the microbiota for the society. So the take-home message of my slide of my presentation is that I hope that you are convinced now that we are ecosystems, and that so we have 10 million bacterial genes that are facing our 23,000 genes. That a human ecosystem can be clustered in enterotypes. That metagenomics is able to reveal the pathology-associated species. And I couldn't mention, but we have also very interesting papers on liver cirrhosis, for instance, that has just been published in Nature last month, showing similar things. as I said, it's a forgotten organ that can be transplanted. And we think that metagenomics is a way to stratify patients. And also, I would like to mention that the functional metagenomics approach that I mentioned it to you, I presented to you, is able to reveal bacterial genes involved in the crosstalk with human cells. So it's a reservoir of pharmaceutical compound, maybe, that will be used in the future, maybe as a therapeutic tool. So thank you for your attention.
Merci, Monsieur Blotière. Je vous propose de passer à ces quelques images qui vont essayer, je dis bien, de résumer la pensée très construite de Monsieur Blotière. Regardez ces quelques images qui sont issues d'un film sur le ventre. Normalement.
The universe is a set of ecosystems which interact with one another. Any ecosystem is part of a larger one, and any intervention on an ecosystem will influence the others. These ecosystems are fragile. That's why the misuse of chemical molecules has collateral impacts, sometimes even adverse effects. The antibiotic resistance caused by the massive use of antibiotics in livestock farming is one example. Ultimately, our production model feeds a complex system, the gut. Just as with this chicken, our digestive system is our largest area of contact with the outside world. And our enteric ecosystem contains 10 times more bacteria than the total number of our cells. We're influenced by what we eat. Actually, what we should do is not only feed this ecosystem, but also we need to favour food that keeps it healthy. And that means finding ways of nourishing beneficial bacteria.
Merci, Monsieur Blotière. Peut-être des questions dans la salle avant que Monsieur Blotière ne regagne sa place. Oui, une question. Alors, on va essayer de vous tendre un micro. Voilà, je vais vous demander, voilà, merci de passer le micro et de trouver peut-être une personne.
Jean-Paul Cadoret, directeur des biotechnologies marines chez Ifremer. I have a question. I'm very, very impressed by the work you did. I have a question. I never heard the word or the sentence RNA-seq or transcriptome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the next step actually. The first step was really to sequence the genome. Then that will be the next step. But it's a tricky approach because the bacteria, we have to get rid of human RNA, and we have to get rid of all the uninteresting RNA like 16S and transfer RNA. And so it's tricky things to do, but definitively that's, I think we started already to play with that, but that will be for the next 2 or 3 years, I think. The first set was, what are the genes present, and are they transcribed? And that will be the future.
Merci. Une autre question? Non, merci Monsieur Blotière. Je vous invite à regagner votre place et je pense que vous pouvez l'applaudir. Merci.